Maya Carter, 30 years old, was a sharp-minded and relentless African-American FBI agent. From the moment she stepped into the bureau, she had proven herself to be more than just competent. She was exceptional. Her investigative instincts were razor-sharp, and she had an unyielding commitment to justice that made her both respected and feared. Maya wasn't just good at her job, she was one of the best. Despite the obstacles she had faced throughout her career, she never let discrimination or doubt slow her down. Every case she solved, every criminal she brought to justice, only reinforced her belief that fairness should never be compromised. Her colleagues admired her, her superiors trusted her, and criminals, well, they learned to fear her. But despite all of this, Maya remained humble. Her weekend routine was simple. Saturday mornings were her time to escape the stress of her job, to clear her mind before another week of intense investigations. A peaceful bike ride through Riverside Park, the sprawling green haven on the outskirts of the city, was her ritual. She never thought twice about it. It was supposed to be a safe place, a space where anyone, regardless of who they were, could enjoy a moment of quiet. As she strapped on her helmet and pushed her bike onto the familiar winding path, she had no idea that this morning would be different. This ride wouldn't be just another routine escape. It would mark the beginning of an encounter that would challenge everything she stood for. This wasn't just a bike ride, it was the start of a battle. Maya had never come from privilege. She was raised in a small, tight-knit community in Atlanta. Her parents, hardworking and principled, had instilled in her the values of integrity, resilience, and strength. Money was tight, but their home was always filled with love and wisdom. From a young age, Maya understood that she had to work twice as hard to be seen as equal. School wasn't just a place for learning. It was a battleground where she had to prove her worth. While other kids took their opportunities for granted, Maya treated every assignment, every exam, as a chance to solidify her future. When classmates doubted her abilities, when teachers hesitated to believe in her potential, she used it as fuel. She didn't just want to succeed. She had to succeed. Her academic excellence earned her a full scholarship to one of the top universities in the country. While others celebrated their college acceptances with parties, Maya spent her nights studying, knowing that this was only the beginning. Her ambition led her to law enforcement, and by the time she was 30, she had earned a reputation as one of the FBI's most skilled agents. But despite her accolades, Maya never let her success define her. She lived modestly in a small apartment near her office, avoiding luxury and excess. While others sought recognition, Maya focused on results. She believed true power didn't come from status, but from the impact one had on the world. She carried her FBI badge discreetly, rarely flashing it unless absolutely necessary. Power, she believed, was best used responsibly. And yet, despite everything she had achieved, despite the respect she had earned, she knew that to some people, she would never be seen as an equal. Today, she would be reminded of that. The morning air was crisp as Maya pedaled through the park, enjoying the rare moment of solitude. The sun cast long shadows over the path, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. She inhaled deeply, letting the calmness settle into her bones. But then something changed. She felt it before she even saw it. The stairs. A small group of parkgoers had stopped talking, their gazes lingering on her longer than was comfortable. The hushed whispers that followed were barely audible, but Maya didn't need to hear the words to understand their meaning. It was a feeling she had experienced too many times before. The weight of being seen as an outsider, an intruder in a place where others believed she didn't belong. She forced herself to ignore it, keeping her pace steady. But the unease was there, crawling up her spine. Then, a voice called out. "Hey, you!" Maya glanced to her left and saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered police officer, his uniform crisp, his sunglasses pushed low on his nose. His expression? Pure disdain. Her grip on the handlebars tightened. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Maya slowed her bike, exhaling sharply. Her heart wasn't pounding from exertion, it was something else. "This is a public park," she said evenly, her voice controlled. "I'm just riding my bike." The officer scoffed, stepping closer. "Funny, we don't usually see your kind around here." There it was, the venom beneath his words. Maya felt the familiar surge of anger bubbling beneath the surface, but she kept her expression unreadable. "You think you have the right to be here?" he continued, sneering. "We've had reports of suspicious activity, and wouldn't you know it? You fit the description." Maya's jaw clenched. "Suspicious activity?" she repeated. "You mean riding my bike?" The officer took another step forward, invading her space. "Show me your ID, now." Maya didn't move. Instead, she reached for her phone. "If you're going to question me," she said calmly, "I'll be recording this conversation." That was the moment everything changed. Before she could react, the officer's hand lashed out, striking her phone from her grasp. It hit the pavement with a sharp crack, the screen shattering on impact. A hush fell over the park. Maya looked up slowly, locking eyes with the officer. He had no idea what he had just started. The officer's fist swung toward Maya's face, fast and reckless, but she had already anticipated the move. With reflexes honed from years of training, she tilted her head just enough for his punch to graze past her cheek. At the same time, she brought up her right arm, catching his wrist midair. The crowd around them held their breath. No one moved. No one spoke. The officer growled in frustration, his face reddening as he yanked his arm back, but Maya didn't let go. She twisted his wrist slightly, just enough to make him stumble and hiss in pain. "You don't want to do this," she warned, her voice low but steady. "Walk away." But his pride was already wounded. He wasn't backing down. Instead, he used his free hand to reach for his baton. Maya knew she had to act. With a swift motion, she let go of his wrist and sidestepped just as he swung the baton at her ribs. It cut through the air with force, but it hit nothing but empty space. Before he could regain his balance, Maya struck. She hooked her foot behind his knee and swept his leg out from under him. The officer crashed onto the pavement, his baton clattering beside him. A few people in the crowd gasped. Some pulled out their phones, recording the entire scene. Maya took a step back, hands raised, showing she wasn't attacking, only defending herself. She didn't want violence. She wanted accountability. But the officer, blinded by rage and humiliation, scrambled to his feet. He yanked his gun from its holster. The world seemed to freeze. Maya felt the shift in the air, the deadly weight of what was about to happen. She had faced criminals, killers, and the most dangerous men in the country. But this moment felt different. This wasn't some nameless thug on the streets. This was a man who had sworn to uphold the law, now pointing his weapon at an innocent person simply because he couldn't handle the fact that she had fought back. The crowd erupted. "Put the gun down," someone yelled. "Are you insane?" another voice shouted. Phones were raised higher. People were recording every second. Maya's pulse pounded in her ears, but she didn't let fear control her. She took a slow breath, keeping her hands in sight. "Think about what you're doing," she said, her voice calm despite the tension crackling in the air. "You pull that trigger, and it's over. For you." The officer's hands trembled slightly. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. "You assaulted an officer," he spat. "You think I'll let you walk away from this?" Maya's jaw clenched. "I defended myself, and every second you keep that gun aimed at me, you dig yourself into a deeper hole." The weight of the moment was crushing. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about every black person who had been stopped, harassed, or worse, simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was about the unspoken truth that, in moments like this, justice wasn't guaranteed. Would anyone believe her story if there were no cameras? Would the truth even matter? She had spent her entire career fighting for justice. But right now, the very system she served was threatening to destroy her. Let's pause for a second. If you were in Maya's position, what would you do? Would you fight back? Would you comply, even if you knew you had done nothing wrong? This moment isn't just fiction. It's a reflection of reality. Stories like Maya's happen far too often in the real world. How many times have we seen innocent people forced to defend themselves against the very system meant to protect them? Justice isn't just about laws. It's about accountability. It's about who has the power and how they use it. Now, ask yourself, if this were happening right in front of you, would you step in or would you stay silent? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Now back to the story. The officer's grip on his gun tightened, but he hesitated. His gaze flickered to the growing number of phones pointed at him. Maya saw the shift in his expression, the realization that he was losing control. The situation had spiraled out of his hands. He wasn't in charge anymore. He lowered his gun just an inch. Not enough to be safe, but enough for Maya to take her chance. Before he could react, she moved. With the speed of a trained agent, she lunged forward, grabbing his wrist in a precise, controlled motion. With a sharp twist, she disarmed him, the gun slipping from his fingers. She kicked it across the pavement, far out of reach. The officer staggered back, shock flashing across his face. A moment later, sirens blared in the distance. Backup had arrived. Police vehicles screeched to a halt at the edge of the park. Officers rushed out, weapons drawn. But they weren't pointing at Maya. They were pointing at him. "Stand down, Officer Reynolds," one of the senior officers barked. "You're done." The disgraced cop, Reynolds, looked around wildly as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. Maya exhaled slowly, relief flooding her system. This wasn't just her fight. It never had been. It was a fight for truth, a fight for justice, and today she had won. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The officer Reynolds stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. The weight of Maya's words, of the badge she held up before him, crushed the last remnants of his arrogance. An FBI agent. His worst mistake wasn't losing the fight, it was underestimating her. The crowd murmured, their whispers swelling into a wave of condemnation. Some people openly called him out, their voices laced with anger. Others continued filming, knowing they had just witnessed something monumental. Maya didn't lower her badge. She didn't break eye contact. "This isn't over," Reynolds muttered, his voice lower now, tinged with desperation. He was still trying to hold on to his authority, still clinging to the power that had just slipped through his fingers. Maya tilted her head slightly. "Oh, I know it's not," she said coolly. "For you, it's just beginning." The senior officers who had arrived as backup moved in, their postures tense. One of them, a lieutenant with graying hair and a hardened expression, stepped forward. His gaze flickered between Maya and Reynolds, piecing together the situation. "Reynolds," he said sharply, his tone edged with controlled anger. "Hand over your badge and weapon." Reynolds snapped his head toward his superior. "Sir, she." "Now." The finality in the lieutenant's voice left no room for argument. With a clenched jaw and fists shaking, Reynolds pulled his badge from his uniform and unholstered his gun. He hesitated for only a second before dropping them both into the lieutenant's outstretched hand. The moment his badge left his grasp, so did his power. A ripple of satisfaction ran through the crowd, but Maya remained stoic. She knew this wasn't victory. This was just one battle in a much larger war. "You're placing me on suspension?" "Over her?" Reynolds spat, motioning toward Maya with the same disdain that had fueled his actions from the start. "No," the lieutenant corrected. "You're under investigation." Reynolds' face paled. The murmurs in the crowd turned to outright discussions. People knew this wasn't just about Maya. This was about every abuse of power that had gone unchecked for too long. Maya finally lowered her badge and took a step back, inhaling deeply. Her heart was still pounding from the confrontation, but she refused to let it show. One of the senior officers turned to her. "Agent Carter," he said, his voice measured, "we'll need your statement." She nodded. "I'll provide everything you need. But you won't just be getting my statement." She gestured to the dozens of bystanders still holding up their phones. "You'll be getting the truth." The weight of her words settled heavily on the officers around her. This wasn't just an internal report. This was public. This was undeniable. And this time, they couldn't look away. The fallout was swift. By the time Maya returned home, her phone was already flooded with calls, from colleagues, reporters, even civil rights activists. The video had gone viral within hours, spreading across social media like wildfire. Headlines exploded across the internet. FBI agent stands her ground against abusive cop and wins. Officer suspended after attempting to arrest innocent black woman. Racial profiling exposed, how one woman fought back. Maya scrolled through the news, her jaw tightening at the range of reactions. Some people celebrated her bravery, calling her an inspiration. Others, predictably, tried to twist the narrative, painting her as the aggressor. But the facts were indisputable. The footage spoke for itself. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion seeping into her bones. This wasn't over. It never really was. She had spent years fighting for justice within the system, believing in its ability to change. But today was a reminder that change didn't happen in conference rooms or bureaucratic meetings. It happened in moments like this, in the streets, in the eyes of witnesses, in the hands of those who refused to stay silent. And she wasn't about to stay silent now. Over the next few days, the pressure on the police department intensified. Protests formed outside the precinct. People demanded accountability, not just for Reynolds, but for every officer who had abused their power and walked away unpunished. Maya could have stayed out of it. She could have let the Bureau handle things, let the justice system take its course. But that wasn't who she was. Instead, she took action. She started organizing meetings, community discussions about racial profiling, about the broken relationship between law enforcement and the people they were meant to protect. She spoke at rallies, using her platform to amplify voices that had long been ignored. And she didn't stop there. She connected with civil rights groups, with lawyers, with activists who had spent years fighting the same battle. Together, they built something stronger. A movement. Reynolds had been just one man. But the system that enabled him? That was the real enemy. And Maya wasn't going to let it stand unchallenged. Meanwhile, Reynolds' downfall was inevitable. As the investigation unfolded, more evidence surfaced. Complaints from previous incidents, cases of excessive force, of racial bias began resurfacing. Things that had once been buried were now being unearthed under the scrutiny of the public eye. The department had no choice. 2 weeks after the incident, an official statement was released. Reynolds was fired. His case was being referred to federal authorities for further review. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Maya watched the news coverage in silence, her expression unreadable. She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't the end of injustice. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. Not because one bad cop had been removed, but because people were finally paying attention. Because change, real change, was no longer just an idea. It was happening, and she would make sure it continued. Maya's movement grew faster than she anticipated. What started as a few community meetings had transformed into citywide rallies. Lawyers, activists, and even former law enforcement officers joined her cause, demanding systematic reform. News stations followed her every move, and social media amplified her message. But with attention came resistance. Hate mail flooded her inbox. Threats were left on her doorstep. She was labeled a troublemaker, an instigator. Some called for her to be fired, claiming an FBI agent had no place in activism. Maya refused to be intimidated. She stood on courthouse steps, speaking not just for herself, but for those who had suffered in silence for too long. She worked with policymakers, pushing for independent oversight of law enforcement. Every meeting, every protest, every interview, it was a step toward something bigger than herself. Then the phone call came. The FBI's deputy director. "We need to talk," he said. She knew what this meant. The Bureau had stayed silent for too long. Now they had a decision to make. Would they stand with her, or would they turn their backs? Maya took a deep breath. She had come too far to stop now. This fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. Maya Carter's journey wasn't just about one confrontation in a park. It was about something much bigger. The fight against injustice, the power of standing up for what's right, and the courage to challenge a broken system. Her story reminds us that real change doesn't happen overnight. It takes persistence, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in the truth. Maya didn't just fight for herself. She fought for those who had been silenced, for those who never got the chance to fight back. But here's the real question. Would you have done the same? If you were in Maya's position, would you have stood your ground? Or would fear and pressure have forced you to stay silent? This story isn't just fiction. It reflects real struggles happening every day. Police misconduct, racial profiling, and abuses of power are real issues that affect countless lives. It's easy to look away, to believe it's someone else's fight. But the truth is, we all have a role to play in shaping the world we live in. So now, I turn it over to you. Do you believe justice was truly served? What do you think needs to change in our society? Have you ever faced discrimination or seen injustice firsthand? How did you react? Let's start a conversation. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that challenge perspectives and spark change. Together, we can make a difference.